what I'm going to talk about today is promoting the self-determination of adults with significant intellectual disabilities, a group which I refer to as the forgotten ones. Now, I'm going to first start out with just some background on self-determination, because I don't know how much background those of you out there have in the way that I conceptualize it and we conceptualize it at the University of Minnesota. I'm going to show up a couple of quotes, and then you'll see how long people have been thinking about this construct of self-determination. You know, the basic rights of all human beings include their freedom, equality, and power to execute their will. These rights are distinguishable from people themselves and can be given up to others, but only under conditions in which the individual gives their consent. Situations in which the basic rights of others are never granted, when a person is subjected to the arbitrary and or absolute will of another, are a form of slavery. And those quotes come from John Locke, circa 1690. So we've been thinking about self-determination in general for a long time. But it's only been within, I'd say, the last, is it 30 years now, Mike, or maybe?
Not that
20?
long.
Okay, 20 some odd years that we've started really applying the concept to individuals with disabilities. You know, the operational definition that Mike uses, that, you know, self-determined behavior refers to the volitional actions that enable one to act as a primary causal agent in one's life and maintain or improve one's quality of life. Okay, our definition is quite similar, although a little different. Self-determination refers to individuals exercising the degree of personal control over their lives, very similar to Mike's notion of causal agency, that they desire within those areas of life that are important to them. Now, self-determination is not a lot of things, and there's been a lot of confusion in the literature about what it is and what it is not, and I think that's one of the reasons why, if we look at the literature on self-determination, there's so few studies that have specifically focused on the construct as a whole as related to adults with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Okay, so self-determination is not equivalent to one's levels of personal control. It's not limited to choice making. So again, the title of, I think, our presentation was a little bit of a misnomer. It should have been self-determination. It's not an either-or experience. Either you are capable of self-determination or you're not. I don't think Mike views it that way, and I know we don't at the University of Minnesota. And finally, parents, family members, or other substitute decision makers exercising control over the life of a person with a disability, while may be better than people who don't know the individual well doing that, it's not self-determination either. So when we talk about self-determination, we differentiate it from personal control, because most individuals, including me, do not desire to have personal control over every area of their life. They wish to share it in some areas with trusted others. And sometimes we even are willing to and will voluntarily cede control to others. You know, in some areas of life, I might not particularly value having control, and I might voluntarily cede it to somebody who I trust. The example I always use in my own life is my family finances. Okay, I don't value having control over those. I cede those totally to my wife, who's an MBA, does a much better job than I do, and it takes one massive piece of stress off my life. On the other hand, I have to admit, okay, you know, I do the dishes, I do the laundry, and I do a lot of things around the house to make up for ceding that amount of control. In other areas, people may voluntarily cede control to others because they don't feel they have the skills or the capacities to make informed decisions. And then finally, okay, there are individual differences over those things in life over which people value having self-determination. You know, they change over time. They're not the same. We're not talking about something which is static or frozen in time. When we refer to self-determination, we refer to having that causal agency or control over day-to-day decisions, what to wear, what to eat, what time to go to bed, as well as those more long-term decisions, where and with whom to live, where to work, what type of work to do. Probably the best quote, and to be honest, I forgot where I pulled this from, so I apologize if any one of you out there is the author, is that self-determination is about supporting people to make the things that they personally want to happen in their lives actually happen in their lives. Now, as a whole, when I kind of undertook a review of the literature with Renata's help recently, and we started looking at the research that's been done in the last 20 to 25 years, focusing on supporting self-determination, we found that there was a lot of really good information out there about how to do that effectively with individuals with mild to moderate disabilities. And a lot more for school-age young adults, especially those of transition age, than for adults with intellectual disabilities. Now, there are some studies out there, as Wood and colleagues in their review, I think it was 2005, 2006, of research on self-determination related to people with the most significant cognitive disabilities. But those studies seem to be focused almost exclusively on teaching choice-making skills to this group. So when we do see research that focuses on individuals with the most significant cognitive disabilities related to self-determination, it tends to kind of only focus on teaching a limited number of the capacities or skills that support self-determination. Now, why have we ignored people with the most significant intellectual disabilities when we have thought about and done research on self-determination? Well, one thing I already mentioned, that perspective that some people have that self-determination is an either-or issue. The skills must be demonstrated with complete independence. You can do it or you can't. The second belief that we have found is that there are a lot of people out there, including the direct support professionals with whom we work, and some family members, who believe that people with severe intellectual disabilities wouldn't benefit from self-determination. Then there's the idea that people with the most significant intellectual disabilities couldn't acquire the personal capacities necessary, and I put that word in quotes, for self-determination. Finally, there's a lack of means through which to assess self-determination in a valid and reliable manner among members of this population, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for the most part, for the last 20 or so years, the way we have assessed self-determination is through interviews with consumers or proxy. And then finally, there is an absence of training programs and expertise as to how to foster not choice-making, but self-determination among members of this group. Now, over the years, last 20 or 25 years, we've developed kind of a tripartite or three-part model of self-determination that looks at self-determination as a result of an intersection, when the individual is able to exercise the level of personal control or causal agency that they desire over those things in life that are important to them. We've taken an ecological approach, though, to our framework, and have kind of taken this kind of operational definition of self-determination and kind of embedded it in an ecological framework a la Jim Garbarino, Uri Brown from Brenner. Now, over the last 25 years, there's been a lot of research which is focused on the skills, the attitudes and beliefs, and the knowledge that when consumers have supports their self-determination. I'm really not going to spend time on that because there's a lot of research out there to review it. And our focus is much more ecological. So what it does is it takes kind of that context of the capacities that the individual needs to be self-determined or support their self-determination and puts it within this ecological framework. I mean, that looks at the microsystems in which people with disabilities lead their daily lives. And in the case of adults, it's residential systems. It's the work environment or the day program environment. It's the peer group, and it's the family. Those microsystems, though, interact with each other on a regular basis. So when we're thinking about fostering self-determination or supporting it, we need to take into account those interactions that occur between the residential services system and the family, between the residential services system and the work environment. So we're viewing self-determination as an ecological process, something which changes over time. So what have we learned so far about self-determination? And I'm not just drawing from my own work, but from the broad base of literature that's out there. I think these are the things that we should take away from that research. Number one, all individuals are capable of some degree of self-determination. The difference is in how much support is needed, when it's needed, and in what context it is needed. Number two, self-determination is a lifespan issue. My belief is that a child's first attempt to exercise some degree of self-determination in his or her life is when that infant utters its first cry. It's very rudimentary, it's very basic, but it becomes more complex and differentiated over time. Our quest for self-determination doesn't end until we die. I mean, it is a lifelong issue, not an issue of transition, not an issue of adolescence or early adulthood. Number 3, self-determination, as you might expect from what I've said so far, we believe is a result of an interaction between the individual and their environment. Number 4, it's self-reinforcing. You know, we tell the direct service professionals who we're working with that when you start effectively supporting self-determination, be ready for people to demand more self-determination in their lives. Number 5, self-determination requires, I don't think it's possible without the acceptance of some degree of risk. Okay? I mean, we all take risk when we make decisions, when we set goals for ourselves, and we self-regulate to work for those goals. And then finally, we can't understand self-determination acontextually. I mean, culture has a major impact on self-determination in the way it's expressed. I mean, and by culture, I'm using the term very broadly. Culture includes the family you grew up in and the family's values, the value of your ethnic culture or your racial culture. It includes the culture of the home in which you're receiving your residential supports. And finally, an individual's sex and an individual's age must all be understood if we're to really understand this construct. The missing factor, we think, in many conceptualizations of self-determination is the environment. Because without opportunities for self-determination, it doesn't matter what personal capacities you have, you know, especially for that individual with the most significant intellectual disabilities. Some skills, some knowledge, some attitudes and beliefs that support self-determination really are best acquired and sometimes can only be acquired through real life experiences, you know, providing opportunities for people to exercise control over their lives. And then finally, if existing self-determination capacities are not practiced, like any capacity, they'll wither away. Now, the group that we're most interested in and have been working with over the last couple of years is that subgroup of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who may only be able to exercise self-determination when they're provided with some forms of supports. And one of the things that the training program we've developed tries to do is help staff determine, along with the individual, along with their family, what degree of supports the person needs, what types of supports the person needs, and when those supports are needed and in what contexts, so their voice is heard. Now, to date, if we look at the existing research on self-determination, one of the things that sticks out for me is that interventions to support self-determination have primarily focused on teaching persons with disabilities, shouldn't be new disabilities, teaching persons with disabilities new skills, new capacities, requiring them or asking them to change. And to be honest, I don't think that's different than a lot of the interventions that we have developed for people with disabilities. But there are some dangers, I think, inherent to this approach. You know, some people may not be able to acquire the capacities that we're trying to teach them. Does this mean that they're not capable of self-determination? I'd argue no. Secondly, the rights of people with disabilities have often been restricted because they're told, you can't be self-determined. We won't provide those opportunities until you demonstrate to us that you have this certain level of skill, this certain set of knowledge, these certain attitudes and beliefs. Does that happen with self-determination? Based upon our experiences with adult service providers, all too often. An alternate approach is to really look at changing the ecology. I mean, there is research out there on self-determination which suggests that things like the organizational climate, agency policies and regulations, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes, beliefs of direct support professionals, and the behaviors of these direct support professionals all have an influence or the potential to support self-determination. So the question we have been asking is, might we also achieve enhanced self-determination by changing the environment rather than focusing on persons with disabilities? Could environmental changes, including changes in the manner in which staff interact with the persons with IDD who they serve, also lead to consumers experiencing substantially more opportunities for self-determination and naturally acquiring some of those capacities supported for self-determination? So we started this project, which is funded through our Research and Training Center on Community Living, which is funded through NIDR, and trying to figure out, so what are the skills, What's the set of knowledge? What are the attitudes and beliefs that direct support workers or professionals need to have to best support the exercise of self-determination on the part of consumers with the most significant intellectual disabilities? We brought together homogeneous groups of consumers, a large number of consumers. We brought together DSPs, direct support professionals. We also brought together administrators of programs that provided residential supports. And through a series of these participatory planning and decision-making groups, we asked them to kind of identify what they thought were the competencies that direct support professionals should have in order to best support self-determination. And you can see that there is a fairly long list of competencies, some of which are directly related to self-determination or fairly obvious, some of which are more indirectly related to the support of self-determination. Now, we took these participatory planning and decision-making groups kind of as a starting point. And what we wanted to do is to figure out, well, if these are the skills, if these are the sets of attitudes and beliefs and knowledge that people are telling us are important for staff to have, to what degree do staff possess them? So what we ended up doing is developing a set of instruments. One set of instruments really looks at the extent to which staff, evaluating their own behaviors, and those behaviors are their actual behaviors on the job, their own skill sets, their knowledge base, and their attitudes and beliefs. To what degree do they possess that set of skills, attitudes, and knowledge and beliefs that consumers, DSPs themselves, and administrators from residential programs believe would support self-determination. And obviously, we conducted an extensive review of the literature and included the things that DSPs, consumers, and administrators did not bring up. Now, that's only one piece, because essentially, those are self-perceptions. Okay? We also developed a scale that allowed supervisors to rate the behaviors and skills of their staff. Those same sets of behaviors and skills that we were told were important to support self-determination. And then finally, we decided that for too long, we have been excluding people from our research on self-determination because up until recently, if somebody couldn't respond to an interview, oftentimes they were excluded from research on self-determination because the typical way we assess self-determination is through sets of interviews with people. That's what my group has done. That's what Mike's group and just about every group that's worked with self-determination has done over the last 20 to 25 years. What we decided was that we needed to make a decision, what's more important? What people think and feel and say about their self-determination or what they do? We decided, sitting on the fence as we sometimes do, that they're both important. So we developed a behavioral observation scheme called the Self-Determination and Personal Control Opportunity and Response Evaluation System, SD-CORES for short, which allows for the direct observation of the behavior of direct support professionals within the context of the residential setting and the individuals with intellectual disabilities who they serve in real time and in real life settings. We took the coding scheme and we compared it with Moose's, or paired it with Moose's, the multiple option observation system developed by John Tapp and his colleagues at Vanderbilt University a number of years ago, and are currently using the network version of that, which is referred to as Lily, because as John Tapp told us, the favorite food of a moose is lilies. Now, what we now have is kind of baseline data from 12 residential programs, which includes, now it's over 71 and a half hours, but over 72 hours of direct observation using 10-minute partial interval time sampling of the interactions between direct support professionals and the residents who they serve. This is kind of just a quick look-see at what the screen looks like. We have touchscreen Lenovo netbooks that we're using. Now, while it might look like it would be impossible for anybody to code this many behaviors, we have extremely high inter-rater reliability, if only because we spent a good deal of time training individuals to get reliable. The other reason, unfortunately, the bad news, is because we don't see a lot of staff behavior that supports self-determination, and in the 12 organizations that we're working with, we haven't seen extremely high levels of self-determination among individuals with the most significant disabilities. this gives you kind of a quick synopsis of some of the things that we are seeing. We look at the opportunities that staff provide for self-determination, and you can see kind of in those yellow areas, they're very low. We look at the direct supports staff provide to support self-determination, modeling self-determined behavior, directly teaching self-determined behavior, and those are very low. Probably the most alarming thing that I think we found in 72 hours of observation is that while staff were almost always present, in only 25% of the instances when we were observing behavior did they engage the clients who they were supposed to be supporting. This gives you kind of a little bit of a look-see at the behaviors of individuals with disabilities who are being served, primarily individuals with severe or profound disabilities. Now, it does show that they were being provided with some opportunities to make choices, and were making choices. They were making decisions when being provided with opportunities to do so. There was some goal setting, and there was a good deal of kind of expressing opinions, oftentimes non-verbally, and preferences and needs. What surprised us, and again was a little bit disappointing, was that in 72 hours of observations, and these observations were typically conducted at times when residents were together and all residents were in homes, there was 100.5 minutes of resident-to-resident interaction. Now, we were hoping and counting initially on being able to use those types of interactions to help support self-determination. But if we're going to do that, the first thing we have to do is change that home culture and environment so that there is a greater amount of resident-to-resident and DSP-to-resident interaction. Our observations of DSPs suggest that their support for consumer self-determination is both infrequent, and when it does occur, it's short in duration. Individuals with intellectual disabilities, specifically those with the most severe and profound disabilities, the most intensive support needs, display a similar pattern of behavior, with the more complex behaviors associated with self-determination rare in occurrence, and even those more simple behaviors associated with self-determination not all that prevalent. Now, although staff, again, are almost always present, they're rarely engaged. And the typical patterns of staff interaction with consumers occur in a group context. Very rarely did we see one-to-one interaction. The relationship between staff support and opportunities is measured behaviorally, and consumer self-determination on our SD CORES scale was 0.77 between support and self-determination, and 0.72 between opportunities and self-determination, suggesting to us that when those opportunities are provided, when support is provided, individuals with the most significant cognitive disabilities do have the capacity to exercise self-determination. So, what are the next steps? Is self-determination just about the extent to which people feel or think they're the causal agents in their lives? Or is it about what persons do, the behaviors and actions they engage in, which allow them to, as Irving Martin, kind of the godfather of self-advocacy in Minnesota, once told me, live our lives the way we want to, rather than the way other people expect us to? So, in an attempt to kind of change the data that you just saw, we have developed through our Research and Training Center a project in which we're using kind of a randomized controlled trial basis to test the efficacy of a training program for DSPs designed to help them better support consumer self-determination. I mean, we're assessing DSP behavior, skills, knowledge, and attitudes and beliefs, as well as the extent to which residents engage in self-determined behavior, both from an interview standpoint and from direct behavioral observation. We've developed and are currently in the process of implementing 14 lessons designed to equip staff with the skills and knowledge to be able to better support consumer self-determination. And because this is a randomized controlled trial, we have triads of homes that we've recruited from each of the organizations with whom we're working. One home gets a business as usual condition, they're our control. A second set of homes receive training, and a third set of homes, and we think this is going to be a key, receive training and extensive coaching and mentoring. The modules that we've developed are designed not just to change and help staff develop skills to help them better support self-determination, but also to change their attitudes and beliefs about self-determination. With the modules mostly having two versions, one for individuals with more mild to moderate disabilities, and a second version for those individuals who really have developing or emerging communication skills. I am not going to go through the lessons, but if you would like to know what types of things the lessons entail, it's too bad, as Charlie said. So what do we currently know? Okay, currently DSPs engage in few behaviors that actively support the self-determination of the individuals with the most significant cognitive disabilities who they serve. Individuals with the most significant intellectual disabilities therefore experience low levels of self-determination. We still have a lot of questions to answer. I mean, we're implementing this program, and what we want to know is, will the program, specifically designed to enhance the capacities of DSPs to support self-determination, translate into the intended changes in behavior on their part? And will the changes in DSP behavior be associated with greater self-determination on the part of consumers? But we also want to know, will those positive changes generalize to different staff, different contexts, different settings? You know, can changes in staff behavior, especially given the turnover rate in direct service providers, you know, can they be maintained over time? And then finally, will consumers eventually, in the eventual goal, initiate self-determined actions, even if they have intensive support needs, in the absence of supports from DSPs? You know, will they take the initiative to create opportunities for self-determination themselves? So I think I actually stayed within my time, Angela. I'll turn things over to Mike now.